Hello, today I would like to talk about how I personally go about doing my mixdowns. A mixdown is just taking all the instruments or sounds in your song and then balancing the volumes between them in a pleasing manner. So today, to demonstrate this, I have a remix that I've done with Kendrick Lamar and his song Duckworth. I have the acapella right here, which I got from YouTube, and anyone else can get it.
Need it up. His family history, pimping and banking.
So everything that is not his voice are tracks that I've written for the song. So how you'd go about this. First of all, you go and lower all the volumes of all your instruments, all your tracks, to 0. And then what you want to do is you want to get a reference track. I usually play this through YouTube, but I don't want to open YouTube right now to show YouTube content, because then I would get copyright claimed. But we can just pretend that we have one, and it'll be about the same, at least for the purposes of this tutorial. So what you want to do is you want to start with your most important element first. And I would say, because this is a hip-hop track, it would be the drums. So I'm going to start with the kick drum. Now when you do this, generally on your master channel, you want there to be nothing except maybe a limiter, so that if your levels get too hot, they don't go past 0 decibels and start clipping. Now I know everything I just said might have been a little confusing, but essentially you want to keep your volumes low when you're doing this, because as you add more instruments, the overall sound of the track is going to be louder, and you don't want distortion. So keep the instrument levels low for each track. So next is maybe the snare drum. And I'm terrible at labeling, so it's gotta be here somewhere. We're just gonna do random. We're just gonna keep looking until we find it. So right now during this phase, I would be looking at the reference track. Another hip-hop song that I really enjoy on YouTube, I'd be listening to it and I'd think to myself, how loud is the kick in comparison to the snare? And then I would try to match that in my project. Right there, that sounds about good to me. Next, we'll do Kendrick's vocals.
His family history, pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got some hair from a smoker last weekend. Dodger policeman working for his brick on me. Small time hustler graduated to a brick on him.
Alright, that sounds about fine to me. It's hard to tell since I don't have a reference track, but again, you'll have a much better idea if you do have one. Next is the bass.
Need it up. His family history, pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter piece.
I'd say right about there. I'm going to put the pitch up so that you can hear the bass if you're listening on your phone.
Need it up. His family history, pimping and banking.
You might not even hear it then. But I got my drums, my vocals, and my bass. Those are the biggest elements I feel are important in a hip-hop track, so I've done those first. Now I can go through the secondary elements, bring those up to a level that I feel comfortable with. And the next element I would say is, I guess, the hi-hat. So.
Need it up. His family history, pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got some hair from a smoker last weekend.
Okay, next track. I have this organ that I have, this keyboard. So I'm going to see if I can find that real quick.
Need it up. His family history, pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got some hair from a smoker last weekend. Dodger policeman working for his big on me. Small town hustler graduated to a...
I'd say right about there is fine. And whenever you're doing this, you always want to check every once in a while your mix in mono. See, when I'm flipping this, when I'm dragging this to the right over here, I'm changing the track from stereo to mono. This means that when I listen to this now, it's going to sound like it would on a phone, similarly, kind of, because phones only have one speaker, so they can only output mono audio, whereas I'm using headphones right now, which have two speakers, and also studio monitors, which are two speakers, and most things are two speakers and above, but we always want to check for things like radios, or if someone has just one earbud in and they're listening to your music, it's important to check. So we're going to check that now.
His family history pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got some hair from a smoker last weekend. Dodger policeman.
Alright, that sounds about right to me. I turned up the organ a little bit because it seemed like it was lacking when I turned it into mono. Now to compensate for this, when you put it back into stereo, the organ is going to sound louder because you've raised the volume. Obviously. But you might notice the organ is moving from left to right, panning wise, slightly. And we don't get that effect in mono. So when we come back to stereo, we want to make the organ more mono to better represent what we heard when we tested the track in mono, if that makes sense.
His family history pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got some...
Okay, I might be crazy, but that just sounds better to me. I've made it more mono, I believe, the organ, to better translate to the mono mix. Now we're going to move on to the next element, which I don't honestly have an idea of what the next element is going to be, so I'm just going to move faders up until I find an element that I want to do the balance on, and then we'll go from there.
His family history pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got some hair from a...
Okay, so here's one. We have this really like squeaky synth. We're gonna set it in mono and set the level of it.
His family history pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got...
Alright, so I don't want this one really loud. I just want it kind of in the background, so...
His family history pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got some hair from a smoker last weekend. Dodger policeman working for his big on me. Small town hustler graduate.
Okay, that seems about fine to me.
His family history pimping and banking. He was meant to be dangerous. Clacked him a grip and start slanking. 15 scraping up his jeans with quarter pieces. Even got some hair from a smoker last weekend.
It just occurred to me I'm probably going to get copyrighted anyway because it's censoring Kendrick's audio. So, whatever. Alright, next part of the song. I add this instrument. Alright, and we're going to balance it in mono again.
The babies had a couple of shooters caught a murder case. Fingerprints on the gun, they're assuming, but witnesses couldn't prove it. That was back when he turned his back and they killed his cousin. He beat the case and went back to hustling. Bird shuffling, Anthony rang. The first in the projects with the two-tone Mustang. That 5.0 thing.
Okay, that sounds about right. Now we're going to check it in stereo. Make sure it's not going too wide in the stereo field because it can be distracting if you have Kendrick or your main elements right in the center, and then you have this really weirdly wild panning instrument that's just going from left to right, or it's too left and too right. It can be distracting. So
the babies had a couple of shooters caught a murder case. Fingerprints on the gun, they're assuming, but witnesses couldn't prove it. That was back when he turned his back and they killed his cousin. He beat the case and went back to hustling. Bird shuffling. Anthony rang. The first in the projects with the two-tone Mustang.
Okay, sounds fine.
The babies had a couple of shooters caught a murder case. Fingerprints on the gun, they assuming, but witnesses couldn't prove it. That was back when he turned his back and they...
Alright, right here we have a new instrument.
Stuck up the place before, back in 84. That's when affiliation was really 8 years of war.
I'll let you hear it in soloed out. Alright, you can see right here I have an EQ. I've taken out the low end of this particular instrument because we don't need it. This instrument is just a mid and some highs instruments, so you don't really need it in the lows. So you can take those out to make room for the bass and the kick drum. We're going to check it in mono.
Stuck up the place before, back in 84. That's when affiliation was really 8 years of war. So many relatives telling us, selling us, devilish work, scaling us, crime, intelligence, felonies, prevalent, robbing. Stuck up the place before, back in 84. That's when affiliation was really 8 years of war. So many relatives telling us, selling us.
Alright, that seems fine to me. Maybe turn this instrument down a little bit.
Stuck up the place before, back in 84. That's when stuck up the place before, back in 84. That's when affiliation was really 8 years of war. So many relatives telling us, selling us, devilish.
Okay. So, now that we have most of the elements, there's a part over here that has a lot more elements, but we're not going to talk about that part today, or ever. So we're just going to focus on this part. So, now that you have all your elements, and it sounds good compared to your reference track. By the way, if you're listening to your reference track through YouTube or some other way that you can turn the volume down, I suggest maybe turning the volume down of the reference track by half. That way, you don't have to turn up your instruments really loud to get them close to the reference track instruments volumes. And it'll keep headroom on your master channel so you're not distorting. So as you can see, we're only a little bit above the halfway mark, which is great. You don't want to be up here, and you don't want to be too quiet. You can see the drums are having some still nice transients coming through the rest of the tracks. But at the end of your mixing, after bringing all the volumes up, you may be what's it called? You may want to turn your drums up after you've done everything, or you may want to turn something up after you have raised all the levels, even though you set them in the beginning of the mixdown. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's why we left ourselves a little headroom. So right now, I feel like the kick drum should be a little louder, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to start in mono. Alright, I did it with the kick drum, now I'm going to do it with the snare. Alright, now I might turn the vocals up a little bit. Again, you're going to want to reference with your reference track. That's why it's called a reference track. You want to see the relationship between their instruments and your instruments. Get as close as you can, while also having your song sound good with what it is. Because not all songs are going to sound good if you literally just copy the volumes from one song to another. Like one song's kick might be this loud, and then you go and make your kick drum exactly that loud. It's going to get you in the ballpark of what your song needs to sound the best it can, but it's not always going to be the absolute solution. So you want to use half your brain and half your ears for this kind of stuff. Okay, Sounds good to me in mono. Let's check it in stereo.
Stuck up the place before, back in 84. That's when affiliation was really 8 years of war. So many relatives telling us, selling us, devilish work, scaling us, crime, intelligence, felonies, prevalent proposition with nines. Ducky was well aware, they robbed him.
Okay. So that sounds decent to me. I did not have any reference track for this to listen to. And I was still able to come up with decent results from using the knowledge that I've had from previous reference track sessions. But yeah, that is how you do a mixdown. I probably missed a couple things. Please let me know in the comments if there's anything that I glossed over that you'd like me to talk about more. And I will comment and explain everything that you guys want me to. So that's basically a mixdown. There's no panning on any of these. That is part of the mixdown process, panning your instruments left and right. With this particular song, I didn't feel that panning was needed for these particular tracks. But if you really wanted to, I can go through that really quickly. The theory with panning is if an instrument occupies a similar space in sound, you want to pan those instruments away from each other. So if you have strings, actually this is a good example. In the orchestra, they put the strings on the right. They put the low strings on the right, and they put the medium to high strings on the left. They do this because they don't want, it's to better separate similar sounds so that you have more definition. They put the trumpets in the center, and they put the piano to the far left sometimes, or in the center. But the entire point of orchestrating or arranging instruments in an orchestra the way they do is for sound separation, so that each instrument group can shine the best that it can and not get muddled by other instruments. And that's the same exact theory and process that you want to apply when you're doing a mixdown when it comes to panning. This instrument pans left to right, so it's self-panning, so I don't really need to touch on that. Yeah, this is a mid instrument. That's a high instrument. This one self-pans. Low instruments you always want to keep in the center of your song. Speakers are able to produce bass much punchier and more effectively if you make your bass sounds in the center of your song. So you can see right here I have it mono, the bass, the 808 bass. Now, although the kick drum is a considered lower instrument, I have it panned way out because I wanted the drums to have a stereo effect to them, as if you were the drummer yourself. So stylistic choices like that can overrule some of the more traditional rules, like keeping your bass instruments in the center. It's at the end of the day, it's whatever sounds good, and this sounds good to me, so this is what I go with. I hope you guys enjoyed this video on how I personally do a mixdown, and I'll be looking forward and seeing you guys in the next video.